On June 3, 2017, at approximately 3:33 p.m., two uniformed officers from the Dayton Police Department in Ohio, Brad Coleman, 34, and Mike Stanley, 37, discharged their service weapons at Latosha Johnson, a 26-year-old woman holding her 8-month-old son in her arms. The incident unfolded within less than 20 seconds of their arrival on Maple Street. 7 rounds were fired in total, 4 of which struck Johnson in the chest and back. She fell forward using her body as a shield over the infant. Emergency medical technicians later confirmed her death at the scene. The child sustained no physical injury. Immediately after the shots were fired, Officer Coleman made a call over the radio. Suspect opened fire on officers. Applied response measures. 1 target neutralized. This message was logged by dispatch at 3:34 p.m. Coleman's statement implied that Johnson had fired at them, though no independent confirmation of gunfire from her was made at the scene. Within minutes, additional patrol units arrived and cordoned off the property at 247 Maple Street. From the outset, questions arose among neighbors who had been outside at the time. Several witnesses observed Johnson standing on her front porch shortly before the officers' arrival. She was holding her baby in one arm and gesturing with her free hand. Some said she appeared to be holding a cell phone. Others claimed they saw an unidentified dark object. No witness reported seeing a muzzle flash or hearing gunfire from her direction. Despite this, Coleman's call to dispatch framed the event as an exchange of fire. Surveillance equipment from a residence across the street partially captured the encounter. Investigators recovered the recording, which showed Johnson visible on the porch when officers arrived. The footage documented Coleman issuing a command and Johnson raising one hand. The image resolution, however, was insufficient to establish with certainty what she was carrying, if anything. At 3:47 p.m., a neighbor, Cynthia Morales, 42, phoned Terrence Johnson, Latosha's husband. Terrence, a 28-year-old mechanic employed at a local auto shop, was midway through a routine shift when the call came through. Morales told him, "Terrence, come quickly." Something happened to Latosha. Without seeking further detail, Terrence left his workplace and drove directly to Maple Street. Records from his employer confirm he clocked out at 3:49 p.m. Upon arrival, Terrence encountered multiple police cruisers, an ambulance, and yellow barrier tape marking off the yard and porch. He immediately recognized his wife's body lying near the steps. Paramedics were attending to the infant, who was inside an ambulance crying, still wearing clothes stained with blood. Terrence attempted to approach, but was restrained by officers at the perimeter. According to his later statement, he shouted several times, demanding to know what had happened. Officers only responded that his wife had been armed and dangerous. While standing behind the tape, Terrence noticed an object on the ground several meters from where his wife's body lay. It was Latosha's gold wedding ring, which he identified immediately. The ring was located approximately 5 meters away from the porch in the direction of the street. No officer at that time seemed to acknowledge it. Terrence would later recall this detail repeatedly, noting that his wife never removed her ring voluntarily and that it was unusual for it to be lying so far from her body. By 4:15 p.m., the coroner's unit arrived to transport Johnson's body. Preliminary assessment at the scene confirmed 4 entry wounds consistent with .40 caliber rounds, matching the officers' issued service pistols. A total of 7 casings were collected from the driveway and yard area, all fired from police weapons. No bullet fragments were reported as recovered from the surroundings that could indicate return fire from Johnson. At the same time, crime scene technicians began documenting the area. Among the evidence later listed in the official report was a Glock 19 handgun with a filed serial number, recovered near the porch where Johnson had fallen. According to the initial statements by Coleman and Stanley, Johnson had been holding this weapon while carrying her child and dropped it as she collapsed. No fingerprints or DNA analysis results were available on the day of the shooting. Terrence was not informed about the discovery of the gun until later. Neighbors who had gathered nearby provided immediate but conflicting accounts. Some recalled hearing Coleman shout, "Police! Hands up! Drop the weapon!" Others said they could not make out his exact words. Several claimed they heard Johnson respond audibly before the shots, though what she said was unclear. One neighbor, Harold Price, 55, insisted he heard Johnson say, "I don't have a weapon," while another, Renee Ellis, 31, believed she said, "Don't come closer." These discrepancies prevented a definitive understanding of the verbal exchange at the scene. The official timeline placed the beginning of the incident at 3:25 p.m. on June 3, 2017. At that time, a 911 operator from Montgomery County received a call reporting a violent domestic disturbance at 247 Maple Street. The caller's gender was indeterminate due to voice distortion. The message was clear but unusual. Woman with a gun screaming at a child, threatening to kill him. She's completely lost control. The operator logged the call as Priority 1, domestic violence with weapon present. The duration was recorded as 1 minute and 12 seconds. Dispatch forwarded the information to units in the area. Officers Brad Coleman and Mike Stanley acknowledged the call and reported themselves en route at 3:26 p.m. They arrived on scene 8 minutes later, at 3:34 p.m. The timeline indicated they exited their vehicle almost immediately upon arrival. From there, less than 20 seconds elapsed before the gunfire that ended in Latosha Johnson's death. Later analysis of the 911 call revealed irregularities. The distortion in the caller's voice suggested either the use of masking technology or interference during transmission. Technicians noted the absence of background noise that is typically present in live domestic disturbance calls, such as shouting, crying, or movement. Furthermore, the caller provided only the address and description of a woman with a gun threatening a child, but no identifying details such as names or relationship to the household. Investigators flagged the recording for further review, but, on the day of the event, officers acted under the assumption it was legitimate. The officers' own accounts aligned. Coleman said Johnson was brandishing a handgun while cradling the infant, and Stanley stated she refused to comply and kept pointing the weapon in their direction. The officers both described giving clear commands. Coleman reported shouting, "Police! Hands up, drop the weapon!" Neighbors confirmed hearing the phrase, though some only partially. According to records, 15 seconds passed between the command and the firing of 7 rounds. The discharge of weapons lasted approximately 3 seconds. Coleman fired 4 rounds, Stanley 3. Johnson collapsed immediately, still holding her child. Officers removed the infant and placed him on the grass before paramedics arrived. Within minutes, Coleman made the dispatch call, framing the incident as a response to hostile fire, though no casings or ballistic evidence confirmed gunfire from Johnson. Following standard procedure, crime scene technicians conducted a search. Near the area where Johnson fell, they reported recovering a Glock 19 pistol with its serial number filed off. Coleman later explained during his preliminary statement that Johnson had been holding the gun and that it fell to the ground when she collapsed. He described seeing her grip the weapon in her right hand while holding the baby with her left. Stanley confirmed Coleman's version. However, neither officer's body camera was functioning at the time. Coleman's device was listed as out of service for repair, while Stanley's report noted his camera failed to activate. This left the recovered surveillance footage and civilian testimonies as the only external records of the exchange. The discovery of the Glock raised further questions. The weapon had no traceable serial number. Ballistics examination was requested, but on the day of the incident, no results were available. Officers logged it as recovered evidence and transported it to the property room. The presence of the gun near Johnson's body was presented as corroboration of the officer's statements, but several witnesses who observed the aftermath stated they had not seen any weapon on the ground until officers began moving items around the area. These statements were noted but not treated as primary evidence in the initial report. At 5:02 p.m., Detective Laura Benton from the Homicide Unit arrived to take control of the investigation. She reviewed the positions of the casings, the recovered firearm, and the trajectory of the bullets. Benton's first observations did not challenge the officer's accounts. However, during her brief exchange with Terrence Johnson, who had by then arrived and identified his wife, she asked an unusual question. Did she say anything about a complaint before she died? Terrence later recalled his confusion. He told investigators he had no knowledge of what Benton was referring to. No one provided clarification at the time. By late June 2017, 3 weeks after the death of Latosha Johnson, Terrence Johnson had exhausted nearly all official channels. He had been interviewed twice by homicide detectives, once by Internal Affairs, and once by the prosecutor's office. Each time, he was given the same explanation. Officers Coleman and Stanley had responded to a high-risk domestic violence call, had encountered an armed suspect, and had used lethal force within departmental guidelines. When Terrence attempted to raise the issue of the distorted 911 call, or the absence of clear evidence of a weapon in his wife's hands, he was told these matters were under review. No timeline for resolution was provided. Frustrated and with little financial stability left, Terrence made the decision to seek outside help. He withdrew the remainder of his savings, approximately $3,400, and contacted Robert Hill, a licensed private investigator operating in Montgomery County. Hill, 52, was a former sheriff's deputy who had left law enforcement after 15 years to run a small investigative agency. He was known locally for handling insurance fraud cases, workplace background checks, and, occasionally, sensitive criminal matters when families distrusted official findings. Hill began by reconstructing the last weeks of Latosha Johnson's life. He interviewed family members, friends, and co-workers, then submitted public records requests for traffic stops, complaints, and internal affairs filings. Within 10 days, he discovered that on May 26, 2017, exactly 1 week before her death, Latosha had filed an official complaint with the Dayton Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. The subject of her complaint was Officer Brad Coleman. The complaint described an incident on May 20th when Coleman conducted a traffic stop on Latosha's vehicle near West 3rd Street. According to her statement, Coleman alleged that she had failed to signal a turn. During the stop, he allegedly suggested he could resolve the issue amicably if she agreed to provide sexual favors. When she refused, Coleman allegedly escalated, telling her he could arrest her for drug possession and that he would find narcotics in her car if necessary. Latosha reported that she had secretly activated a voice recording application on her phone during the exchange. In her complaint, she claimed the audio captured Coleman's threats word for word. Hill verified through a records clerk that such a complaint had been logged. He also discovered that, at the time of her death, the matter had not advanced beyond preliminary review. The audio file, according to the department's evidence system, had been checked in as part of the case. Its current location was listed as pending transfer to secure storage. Further inquiries by Hill suggested Coleman had become aware of the complaint before the internal review began. Through an officer contact, Hill learned Coleman had accessed Latosha Johnson's personal information within the department's database on May 25th, 1 day before she officially filed her report. Access logs showed Coleman reviewed her driver's license record, vehicle registration, and prior citations. There was no legitimate reason for him to do so at that time. Hill's investigation also revealed details about Coleman's partner, Officer Mike Stanley. Interviews with 2 former colleagues painted Stanley as a veteran officer with a long-standing issue of alcohol misuse. Several individuals claimed Stanley often drank during off-duty hours in excess, and on at least 2 occasions had reported for work while still under the influence. Hill was told, though he could not prove, that Coleman had knowledge of Stanley's drinking and had used it as leverage. According to one source, Coleman warned Stanley that unless he fully backed him in all matters, he would disclose Stanley's behavior to supervisors. On July 7th, Hill arranged to meet Officer Danny Rice, 40, a patrolman with 12 years on the force. Rice had been identified by another source as someone uneasy with Coleman's behavior. During their first conversation, Rice admitted he had personally observed Coleman accessing Latosha Johnson's personal file on May 25th. He told Hill he believed Coleman was preparing something and had expressed open frustration about being accused of harassment. Rice also confided that corruption within the department was not uncommon, but few officers were willing to risk careers by speaking out. Hill asked Rice if he would be willing to speak with Terrence directly. Rice agreed, suggesting they meet in a discreet location. A meeting was scheduled for July 8th at 7 p.m. near an old bridge on the outskirts of town, a place Rice considered quiet and away from prying eyes. Terrence was informed and prepared to attend. However, the meeting never occurred. On the morning of July 8th, Rice was found dead inside his vehicle in a parking lot, less than 2 miles from his home. The initial police report listed a single gunshot wound to the head. A handgun was located on the passenger seat. The case was tentatively classified as suicide pending autopsy results. Colleagues described him as under stress, but gave no indication of suicidal behavior in prior days. For Terrence and Hill, the news was devastating. The one officer willing to corroborate Coleman's prior knowledge of Latosha's complaint was gone. The timing, just hours before the scheduled meeting, created profound suspicion. Officially, the department maintained that Rice's death was a personal matter unrelated to the Johnson case. On July 21, 2017, 2 weeks after Officer Danny Rice was found dead, Montgomery County Prosecutor James Mitchell held a press briefing at the county courthouse. Standing alongside senior representatives of the Dayton Police Department, he announced that the internal affairs investigation into the shooting of Latosha Johnson had been completed. According to Mitchell, the review determined that officers Brad Coleman and Mike Stanley acted within policy guidelines when they discharged their weapons on June 3. The shooting was ruled justified on the grounds that Johnson had posed an immediate threat with a firearm while holding an infant. Mitchell also addressed the harassment complaint Latosha had filed against Coleman. He stated that investigators had concluded the complaint was groundless and a malicious attempt to smear honest officers. When pressed for supporting details, Mitchell explained that key evidence was inconclusive or unavailable. That same day, records confirmed the audio file Latosha submitted with her complaint had been removed from the evidence database. The official explanation was that the recording had been misfiled or corrupted during transfer. No backup copy was located. Following the announcement, Coleman spoke to local reporters outside the Dayton police station. Wearing his uniform, he delivered a short statement. "This woman tried to destroy my career with false accusations. Fortunately, justice prevailed. We saved an innocent child from a dangerous, vindictive mother." His partner Stanley stood at his side, nodding occasionally. Several observers later remarked that Stanley's hands were visibly shaking throughout the appearance. Within weeks, he sold his small house on Maple Street, placed the proceeds in savings for his son, and arranged for his mother, Elaine Johnson, 61, to assume primary care of the child. Terrence told her directly, "Take care of him. Daddy has to defend Mommy's honor." Over the following 6 months, Terrence quietly tracked the routines of both officers. He followed them on their commutes, monitored the places they visited, and studied their patterns of movement. By autumn 2017, he had a clear understanding of Coleman's daily schedule, including his work shifts and the times he returned home. He also identified Stanley's frequent visits to a private gym in a neighboring suburb. Terrence did not involve anyone else in his planning. On November 15, 2017, at approximately 9:10 p.m., Terrence positioned himself outside Coleman's residence on the west side of Dayton. He waited near the driveway holding a metal pipe. When Coleman arrived and stepped out of his car, Terrence attacked. According to forensic examination later conducted at the scene, Coleman sustained multiple blunt force injuries to the head and torso. Before delivering the final blow, Terrence was overheard by a neighbor shouting, "This is for my wife, whom you killed to hide your dirty deeds." Coleman died at the scene. 1 week later, on November 22, Terrence located Stanley in the parking lot of the gym he regularly attended. At approximately 6:30 p.m., Stanley exited the facility and walked toward his vehicle. Terrence confronted him, again wielding a metal pipe. Witnesses in the parking lot reported hearing shouting and then seeing Stanley collapse after repeated strikes. He was pronounced dead by paramedics shortly after their arrival. The injuries were consistent with those sustained by Coleman, confirming a similar method of attack. After the second killing, Terrence made no effort to flee or conceal his actions. On November 23, at 8:45 a.m., police arrived at his residence to serve an arrest warrant. They found him seated at his kitchen table, drinking coffee. On the table beside him was a framed photograph of Latosha. Terrence surrendered without resistance. Officers later recorded his words at the time of arrest. "My wife got justice. Now the whole town knows the truth about your heroes." Terrence Johnson admitted responsibility for the deaths of both officers and explained his actions as retribution for what he viewed as a conspiracy to protect Coleman from accountability for harassment and misconduct. His statement highlighted the loss at the center of the case. His son, now in the permanent care of his grandmother, was left an orphan. The official records concluded with a simple outcome. A mother had been shot by police under disputed circumstances. The complaint she filed against one of the officers disappeared from evidence. A fellow officer who could have corroborated her claims was found dead before he could testify. When the system confirmed the shooting as justified, her husband took the law into his own hands. In the end, 3 people were dead, and 1 child lost both parents in the process.